Firstly, what is the Holocaust? Just to give a quick definition. This is always debated and still will be, probably always will be. For those who don't know exactly what the Holocaust is, it's the attempted, mostly successful physical destruction of all of Europe's Jews, and even that's debated because the Nazis actually listed Jews in Ireland and other countries outside the scope of their control. So the definition of the Holocaust, that gives you a pretty good idea. The physical destruction of all of Europe's Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. There are various settings of persecution which you'll hear about, mainly when I ask what words come into your head when you hear the Holocaust. It's gas chambers, Auschwitz and so on. Auschwitz is almost a synonym for the Holocaust, just as Google has become a synonym for the internet, for example. So it's always simplifying things. You'll hear lots about that, but I do want to acknowledge there were other victims. One of the two main questions that survivors always get asked by visitors is, what about other victims of the Holocaust? And the way that I'm distinguishing the Holocaust here from genocide is not to make a value judgment, say people suffered worse or not as much as other people.
Dave came back from Rwanda 6 years ago, with 28 hours of footage. That was the beginning for us of then what do you do with this footage? He went to take a few photos and then thought maybe he should take a video camera as well. And then it was, my goodness, we've got these amazing stories. What on earth are you going to do with them? So it took a couple of years to figure that out. He ended up making 22 short films out of that footage. We now have another 25 hours of footage. And made a website. It's important to remember that there's that purpose was, I guess, driving what we were on about. And there's this process which starts with getting on a plane with a camera. You know, and I don't know that the product can or should be separated from the process. So a camera in Africa, in some pretty horrendous sort of places. And that's a very weird experience, taking a camera. And sometimes it feels like an exploitative experience. And it's important to sort of navigate that, I guess. I don't think there's any easy way to navigate that. Taking this camera into this shed in the back blocks of Rwanda last April was a very challenging thing, and it was a challenging thing for the people who held the keys to that shed to let us in with our camera. The website's getting a lot of use. The power of digital media, of course, is enormous. You know, start with hopping on a plane with a camera, end up with, well, hopefully not end up, last May we were up to about 950,000 hits a month on the website. So, you know, it's a powerful thing, but I think also, like Adam was saying, that, you know, power can be used for good or bad. You know, you can put anything on the internet, as we all know. And I don't think that there's any safety guard on that, except the integrity of the people doing it. When we were talking to Rwandan people saying, please tell us your story, in April last, which was when we were there last, I kept saying to them, you need to trust. You need to make a decision in sharing your story about whether or not you trust us, because the reality is that's the only safety guard you have. Once we have your story on the camera, we can do anything with it, and you shouldn't tell it to us if you don't trust us to do that. I think digital media needs to be embedded within relationship, and I think digital media on its own, without human connections, is a problem.
And whenever they said something good, it was always worth suspicious, because the good what they said always turned out to be bad. So that got me worried. But we had no option. We got undressed, threw the clothes away, to the barbers, hair shown from the head, from all over the body. And then we came in front of a door which said Brausenbad, which means bathhouse. Before we went in, we had to step in a kind of a trough, which was some disinfectant, and there were two people. No, the barbers and the people who worked, they were all prisoners. And they dipped in stuff, a regular stuff over the head, under the arms, between the legs. And I remember what happened to me, that a drop of that stuff came into my eye, and it started to burn. I thought I'd never see on my eye again. You know, I started to rub and stop. And when I stopped, I got hit with a whip, move on. So I didn't have an option, I moved on. And what I saw with the good eye, there were shower heads. And I thought, well, the gas comes through those shower heads. That's how my brain worked. I tried to position myself, which I was successful, under one of the shower heads, because at that time I figured, when the gas comes through the shower heads, I will take a couple deep breaths. Now we are conscious. The end of story. There's no way out. Now the room was full, the bathhouse, they closed the door, water came down. I touched one shoulder, the other shoulder, they were wet. I felt wet on the body. Just to make sure that it is water, I put my hands like that, had a zip, and a sigh of relief. I'm still alive, it is water. Then I realized it's water, you know. And when I came to that conclusion, they switched the water off and out. When we came out, there were long tables. They threw at me a jacket, a shirt, a pair of undies, a pair of pants, and move on. And then I realized why they told us to keep the shoes. Because shoes you have to fit. If I am number 10 and they would throw me number 7 or number 8, I would be able to work. So not to have trouble with that, I had the shoes, it was okay. When I came out from that, terrible smell hit me. Unbelievable, and I had not the faintest idea at the time what it was all about. And how we were lined up in fives, and we had to wait till the rest would come out. We had we were I think about 1,100, including 200 women. The women, of course, were separated from us, were taken to the women's compound. And as it happened, we were lined up in fives, and I was at the edge of 1 5, and we were ordered to keep our heads down. But I was curious what happens, so I moved my head a little bit to the right, so very carefully, that nobody sees that I'm moving my head, and all I could see is smoke, grey, black, suddenly flame of fire. Didn't have the faintest idea at the time what it was. Eventually, everybody came out, and we were marched to a compound known as the Gypsy compound. I found out later from a prisoner who was there a long time ago, the name came because gypsies were brought, the whole families, into that particular compound. That compound had 32 barracks, and every barrack housed something like between 500 and 700 people. Now, I was told that 2 days before we arrived, they were all taken to the so-called Himmelstraße, which means the avenue to heaven. And that was to the gas chambers and crematoriums. There is an estimate that over 500,000 gypsies were murdered. Not all of them in Auschwitz-Birkenau, but a lot of them in other death camps. But the majority were murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau. There is an estimate that between 1.1 and 1.5 million people were murdered in Birkenau and Auschwitz.
How have you found the day?
Yeah, it's really good, really interesting and intriguing. The Holocaust isn't something that I really knew anything about, so I've gone from having no knowledge to being able to at least comfortably talk about it.
Yeah, and what do you think about the issue of digital media and the Holocaust?
It's really interesting. It's a really good way for preservation, and I think it's a good way to sort of have a virtual tour of a bunch of people that you're not going to meet in terms of the story pods, because it would be pretty rare to meet someone. I mean, we're lucky enough to today, but that's not something that most people would get. I really like the model with the virtual tour of the camp. I think that that's really impressive because it just puts the whole model into context and gives it a lot more emotion.
People are changing continuously. We are subject to the environment which is changing. When I went to school, I was writing with a pen and ink. Today, they're using computers. And the way of people do things and think and the way you use the technology change enormously. iPod is one of the symptoms of the world changing. You can find out much more, or StoryPod, much faster and much easier than ever. What is very important? Two things: acquiring knowledge, and two, the use of the knowledge. Acquiring knowledge, it's very easy, but what you should use people, how to use knowledge for humanitarian purposes, because at the present moment, the first precedence would have to be war, destruction, instead of creation.
Yeah.
And this is one of the biggest problems.
Yeah.
The basic message of the Holocaust, that a human being shouldn't forget about humanity. This is the final message.